Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Hello, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I want to thank you for joining us here today. We have a great guest with us today, Mr. James Fishback. James, welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Well, thank you, Francisco. It's an honor.
Well, James is the co-founder and chief investment officer of Azoria, an American investment firm committed to free thinking, meritocracy, and excellence. He's also the founder of Incubate Debate, a nonprofit that teaches young Americans the power and practice of debate. So we have a lot to talk about, but before we get started, I just want to remind the audience, no matter where you're listening to this today, maybe it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, maybe you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast so you can, basically help this podcast get even more recognition. People like James, give them more of a platform and be able to follow, when we have future guests and future episodes, you'll be the first alerted. And we love to hear comments. So please do write a review, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're at. We'd love to hear what you thought of this conversation and many others as well. Also, many of the guests that have been on the Agents of Innovation podcast are now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community, which we've built over the last 3 years. So we have a lot of live online group coaching sessions with some of these innovators. We also have a book club where we'll oftentimes bring the author of books on to discuss that with members of our community, some of the great concepts of the books that they've written. And maybe most exciting, we do a lot of great fun group trips. So we've taken trips to Guatemala and Argentina and Uruguay and Colombia, Nashville, Tennessee. And, on the trips, we don't just go and do all the fun things in those places. That's important to do. But we also meet with local entrepreneurs and innovators. And we have a lot of great group trips coming up, including one in January in Guatemala. And we're going to the Dominican Republic for the first time in February. For those of you that like cigars, that's going to be a special extra treat there if you like cigars. So really kind of a cigar adventure trip to the Dominican Republic in February. And we've got more planned for the rest of 2025. So we look forward. You can join us at fearlessjourneys.org. Make sure you take a look at all that. But, one of the other hats I wear is I am the executive director of the Economic Club of Miami. And one of the special, we have events throughout the year. But this past February, we held our first ever Miami Economic Forum. It was a full day finance and investment conference. If you'd like to come to the next one, it's actually already on the calendar for February 7th, 2025. But this past year, one of the great panelists we had during the day was James Fishback here, who's now my guest. And so that was the first time I met James at the Miami Economic Forum. Now, James, you are as I mentioned at the top, the co-founder and CIO of Azoria, which is an American investment firm. But what I really want to get to know today is a little bit more of your path there. I understand you and I both grew up. I was born in Miami, but I grew up in Broward County, and I understand you come from Broward as well. So, but I don't think you're in Broward today. But tell us a little bit about who James Fishback was. Growing up in South Florida.
Yeah, so grew up in Broward, grew up in Davie, which is, is a suburb just outside of Fort Lauderdale. Public school kid, fortunate to have that 2-parent household growing up and parents who cared to wonder what was going on in school and to push and to challenge me. And it was an incredible time to grow up in the 90s, in the 2000s, to see. I grew up, and when we got internet when I was about 6 or 7 years old, it was dial-up internet. And so to go from dial-up to broadband to 3G to 4G to 5G, and now I've got Starlink at home, it's incredible. And so I consider myself fortunate now in my late 20s to have seen. I remember going to Blockbuster growing up, and then to getting the first DVD on Netflix growing up, to then using Netflix as a streaming service. And I don't think that folks 10 years older than me, and certainly not 10 years younger than me, would have had it such up close and center as I have, and especially at such a young and impressionable age. And so it was great looking back on that time period. And then I was part of the high school debate team, which really shaped my upbringing. I was always the debate kid in the family. We were the Fishback family is full of talkers, and you're lucky to get a word in edgewise talking about whether it was in 2003, the war in Iraq, or in 2007, whether the iPhone was going to be the next great thing. And it turns out, of course, that it was. But a debate and discourse and discussion was a big part of my childhood. And then I went off to high school. I was on this debate team, and I got to do something that I was passionate about, but in a much more competitive and rigorous way. And, you talk about Azoria's three focuses, our three core values: free thinking, excellence, and meritocracy. Free thinking for me is the core of what debate is, to be able to come to a problem, to come to an issue without any prior bias one way or the other, and to simply look at the problem, look at it, its merits, and try to discuss and debate your way to some semblance of truth.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's keeping an open mind and free thinking as you advertise. Now, I also understand, like me, you have a parent that is an immigrant from a Latin American country. My dad is from Cuba. I think your mother is from Colombia. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, she came to this country in the early 1990s, and I got to spend a lot of my childhood, the summers, going down to Colombia, spending with my family down in a city called Barranca Bermeja in Santander, and to spend time to see that side of my family. I was just down there a couple of weeks ago, actually, and to see this country, the beauty of this country and the beauty of this culture, and then to have the American side, which, growing up and having my paternal grandparents who, go back generations here in this country. And so it was a good risk and a good balance. I joke that, my mom, I learned Spanish not because my mom spoke to me in Spanish, but because she yelled at me in Spanish. And that was a really great way to learn the language growing up, and it's been pretty useful. I got to say that I used it recently. I was at a conference with Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a friend, and Javier Milei was there, and I got to serve as a translator between the two as they were talking about economic policy, and got to introduce President Milei to my good friend Vivek. And so it comes in handy pretty often, which is great.
Well, speaking of Vivek, I saw you on the Vivek Ramaswamy podcast some months ago. Excellent conversation for those who are really looking for a good, maybe hour podcast conversation. You guys were talking some really top level policy, everything from financial to everything what you're doing, and so it was really, really great conversation. Curious, where was the conference with Javier Milei at?
So what I think Javier Milei is doing is he's rejecting the consensus, the status quo of Argentina for the past 25 years. The rolling defaults, the rolling record inflation, the continued currency depreciation, and obviously the human suffering that's come at the hands of all of that. And so what Javier Milei is not just a breath of fresh air, but when you get past that honeymoon period where he's running around with the chainsaw cursing in Spanish, you actually see real policies, which is this idea that no, capitalism, Francisco, isn't the problem. Government interference in capitalist systems is the problem. He recognizes that better than anyone. He rejects the status quo from international organizations. You saw how he went to Davos earlier this year and gave them a run for their money, speaking truth about the broken policies coming from essentially the New World Order, if you will. Not technically true, but close enough. And I think that there's going to be a lot of investment opportunities. There already have been, but a continued stream of investment opportunities from Argentina. One thing that he said to me when we were finishing that conversation in English was, "Make Argentina great again." And I have nothing but love and respect for the Argentinian people and their rich culture and history. And if there's one person who can make Argentina great again, not just again, Francisco, but greater than it's ever been, it is President Milei.
Yeah, well, I've been down there twice in the last 2 years, leading some Fearless Journeys group trips, and really, it's amazing because if you've been to Argentina, you see that they have this crazy economics going on there, right? I mean, the amount of cash that you carry around with you in bags, basically.
That's right.
Because of the peso's worth so little, and compared to the dollar, and just the amount of actual physical like bills that you have to carry around just to pay for something like a dinner, something like that. It's just crazy. But then you look and it's a country with amazing resources. I think the thing that I compare it to the most is something like California, because California is a beautiful, beautiful state. It's got amazing resources. It has a lot of people. It's always been that place that's been part of the American dream. Whether you want to go to Hollywood or whether you want to be a surfer or like you just want to start a new life with your family in Bakersfield, wherever it is.
Right.
There's a lot, and then you've got Argentina's very similar, just beautiful resources, beautiful different types of climates, and you're like, how can a place like this become so economically screwed up? And it just goes to show you, doesn't matter how beautiful of a place you have, economics is so important when it comes to being able to basically economics can ruin a beautiful place. Let's put it that way. Even a beautiful place like California or Argentina. So yeah, I think there's a lot of hope for Argentina if you can get those policies right. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to be a painful process back. But like you said, I think this is a man, Javier Milei, that seems to have the will to do it, and not just the will, but the intelligence. I mean, he's been a long-time economics professor, has written a lot and studied a lot about the Argentine economy and world economy, and he's just, man, these speeches he gives are just so intelligent. It's amazing.
It really is. He talks the right talk, and more importantly, he walks the right walk, and that's so important.
Well, okay, so get back to James Fishback in Florida. James, my understanding is you started college, I think, at Georgetown, and but you didn't quite finish. Tell me a little bit about your educational experience and what you did next.
Georgetown was a great school to go to. DC was a dream city for me. I'm actually right here right now. I spend bits of the summer here because my parents live up here. But, for me, Georgetown was a place where I was in classes with the sons and daughters of people who looked very different from me and politically and thought differently. And so that viewpoint diversity was important. It was really interesting because 10 years later, a lot of these top colleges are unrecognizable. You don't see debate, discussion, and viewpoint diversity there. But I was fortunate enough to get a bit of that when I was there. But when I was there also, I was doing some work. I was doing research on markets for a professor and just doing research on my own outside of classes. I was an economics major. And there were some interesting investment ideas that came out in the summer of 2014. Volatility, whether it was in the rates market or in the stock market, got awfully low. The VIX got as low as 8.5, 9 in the summer of 2014. And I went to someone that I knew from my time in high school debate. The cool thing about high school debate is it's totally flat. You compete with the sons and daughters of millionaires and billionaires. So I went to one of those people who I knew well and said, I've got some ideas here. I think they could make some sense. I walked her through them, and to her credit, she put a little bit of money behind those ideas, and they worked out pretty well. And she began allocating more and more capital every other month to what we were doing in this portfolio. And at the end of 2015, when I had spent about a year and a half doing this with her, she said, "Do you want to maybe turn this into a hedge fund, allow other people to invest?" And I said, "Absolutely." And it was on one condition, Francisco, that I stepped away from my studies at Georgetown, and I think rightfully so. If you're going to entrust somebody with millions of dollars, and we were able to raise $15 million to start this fund called Macrovoyant in January 2016, that if you were to raise that money, that you would, at the very least, make that your full-time job and not get distracted by your intermediate macroeconomics class or your political science history class. And so I did that, and I took a semester off thinking I might come back in a little bit, and if this didn't work out. And fortunately, it's worked out. I did that for 5 years, caught the attention of David Einhorn, shared some ideas with him. He asked me to join Greenlight at the end of 2020. I did that until August of 23, and then left in August of 23 to really build an alternative, Azoria, as a free-thinking, meritocratic alternative as an investment firm. And most people, Francisco, when they leave an established fund like Greenlight, they go start their own hedge fund. We've got an internal fund at Azoria, but what our bread and butter is launching a series of bold, low-cost ETFs that allow Americans anywhere, whether they're a firefighter in Coeur d'Alene or a nurse in Cincinnati, to tap into new, uncorrelated return streams that are part of what we're doing at Azoria. So I'm really excited to be building a new firm, and yes, to be investing, but to be investing on behalf of Americans from all walks of life, as opposed to just the high net worth individuals and family offices typically invest in hedge funds.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to dissect a few things here, especially for those who might be listening. First, I've had a number of guests on this podcast who also either never went to college or left college in the middle and never went back. But it's rare to hear a story. Usually it's a story of somebody starts a retail business or, whatever, right? I mean, a lot of different types of businesses that you think of kind of in a, standard kind of entrepreneurial sense, it's very rare you hear somebody in the world of finance and investment that has left or never went to college or just left in the middle of college to go start a firm. I mean, a lot of times you meet a lot of people who go, maybe they get a business degree, a finance degree, something like that as an undergrad. Then they go off to work for somebody, intern or whatever. Maybe they get a job at a firm for a year or two, and then they say, oh, I got to go get my MBA. So it's like even more school. And then they get the MBA. It's a couple more years, and then maybe they go and they find now they're probably saddled with a lot of debt as well, right? Just to start themselves out. But
Right.
here you are, and you just left in the middle. You never went back. It looks like you had a great opportunity. You had a nice connection. Which I think is also interesting about the debate program that you were part of in high school, in that it gave you a lot of connections. And I think anything we can involve ourselves with, it's great because it's not only experience, but there's those relationships that we might carry forward in the future that could help us that we may not even know, right? So luckily you had a great connection there. But also let me ask you something, because there might be some people here who are not in the finance, investment, macroeconomic world. Can you kind of explain a little bit of when people are going into this field, how with David Einhorn's group with Greenlight, was that a hedge fund as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you explain what a traditional hedge fund looks like, and maybe how it compares to other types of investment funds?
Absolutely. A hedge fund is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and it makes sense to define it, because there's so much, I think, concern about what it is and what it is not. A hedge fund is just a group of people investing alongside one another behind some basic idea or strategy or thesis, usually led by one or a small team of people. And so for David, he launched this fund in 1996. He was in his late 20s as well. And he launched this fund, and the idea was there are certain stocks that we want to go long, we want to buy, we think they're going to go up. But there's also certain stocks that we think we want to short, that we think are actually a little bit too expensive for a whole host of reasons, and we want to profit from declines. And so let's build a really nice portfolio of stocks that were long, stocks that were short, get some good balance, so we're generally unaffected by the day-to-day market moves. We're just exposed to those ideas, and then compound wealth for folks through that. And so that's what a hedge fund would be. Typically hedge funds are open to just high net worth individuals, people who maybe would invest a minimum of $2 to $5 million. They're open to insurance companies, pension funds, and so on. And then compare that to what we're doing at Azoria, creating an exchange traded fund. You think of the most popular exchange traded funds in the world, the SPY or QQQ. These are passive funds. They follow the S&P index or the NASDAQ 100 index. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that same exact ETF vehicle, which allows anyone with any sort of brokerage account to invest in it just as they would a common stock, and create ETFs that are actively managed, that can reposition in real time as new opportunities and new risks emerge, and then compound our investors' hard-earned wealth through those methods, but also to give them daily liquidity. One of the drawbacks of hedge funds is if you're happy with the performance, but you want to take some money out to invest in real estate or put your daughter through college, there's some pretty strict liquidity requirements there. You can only take money out every year or so. There could be a 5 to 10 year lockup. You also don't get to see real-time performance. So as markets are moving, you want to see how your fund is performing, how it's holding up in the midst of new market risks. And you don't get to see that because you might only get an update once a month or even once a quarter. With an ETF, we are giving updates literally every second as our ETF is trading much like it would an Apple stock or an Nvidia stock. And so that comes more scrutiny, but also more responsibility and trust from our investors. And so I see our job at Azoria is pretty simple. It is our investors have a pile of hard-earned money over here they've given us. How do we make that pile even bigger? And that's what I'm excited about doing. And there's multiple ways to do that. We talk about the traditional 60-40. There's alternatives. Our main focus is macro. My background is in macro investing, and that's the general approach we're going to take at Azoria for compounding our investors' hard-earned money.
That's great. So, James, also along your journey here, when you were with Greenlight, were you in New York then?
It was the office is based in New York. I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to be remote, so I would go into the office 3 or 4 times a year. But where I spend most of my time is in rural Florida, in the Florida Panhandle, in a small town called Madison, about 50 miles east of Tallahassee. So really quiet, people don't really figure out what I do there to this day. They know that I work on the internet. That's as far as they've gotten into my work responsibilities. But that's where I spent my time at Greenlight. And I think that helped me, to tell you the truth, because I think there's a lot of groupthink being in the big cities, whether that's New York or the Beltway in DC, is you think a certain way because the people around you think a certain way, and you dare not question those sacred cows. Leading up to the 2016 election, one of those sacred cows that Donald Trump was going to be bad for the economy and bad for markets. Yet when I was in Florida, I wasn't exposed to that type of thinking. I just had an unbiased view, what I was reading, what I was thinking about. And I think that the people who lost a lot of money that night on the election in 2016 were primarily based in the big cities because they had a certain political view of Donald Trump, which they somehow couldn't separate from a sound investment thesis.
So how long have you been based in Madison?
Yeah, being based in Madison, Florida.
No, but for how long?
So 3 years now.
3 years, yeah. Because I'm familiar with Madison, not super familiar, but I used to live in Tallahassee for like 8 years.
Sure.
So I would drive by Madison all the time. Actually, not too far from there is a great place called Live Oak, and I love some of the music festivals there at the Swanee River Music Park they have. So it's a fun time. But yeah, it is rural Florida. I mean, you don't get much more rural than Madison County, Florida, Madison, Florida. So definitely interesting for somebody who's, running a financial firm like Azoria, because like you said, it's, New York, and even Miami and a lot of places, it's great to be because you're talking to a lot of people that are in that industry, but sometimes you are distant from, what some might call real America, or, right. The blue collar people of America living more in the rural area. And it seems like, you're right there, you're connected. I wonder how has that, it's only been 3 years for you in that area, but, somebody who grew up in South Florida, who lived in DC, who lived in New York, and now you're in, the ruralest of some of the rural areas of the country. How has that shaped your thinking about financial markets?
Good work happens in quiet. You can focus in quiet. You can focus without the distractions. I'll tell you, I'm not a big drinker. I'm not a big party person. I'm not the Patrick Batemans of the world in American Psycho. I'm not going out every night or even every week talking to people. I think the best work in our industry, Francisco, happens when we put our heads down, when we read, when we think, when we reflect, and we have thoughtful, intentional conversations with people. So not to say that I'm just sitting looking up at a tree all day. I'm reading, and then I've got half a dozen people that I'm talking to and bouncing ideas off of. Many of whom, by the way, vehemently disagree. And so I'm a big believer that open discussion and debate in our industry gets you closer to what sound investing is. So you don't end up falling victim to things like confirmation bias, where you only seek out information that validates. If I'm long a stock, Francisco, I want to spend time not talking to folks who are long the stock, but talking to people who are actually short the stock. I want to understand where they're coming from. If their logic is off, I need to know that. If their logic is on, I need to know that as well to adjust my position accordingly. And so one thing that I found helpful that you can do anywhere, especially from Madison, Florida, is to write this Substack, which I've started these past couple of months. We've got 8,000 subscribers. It's always going to be free. We're not in the newsletter writing business at Azoria, but to put my thoughts out there. And I've gotten some really great feedback from people on where I might be wrong, what I might be missing, and where I'm dead right. And so I think that this idea of networking is highly overrated. I love coming to conferences like yours, the events that you put on, and visiting South Florida, oftentimes just maybe once or twice a month. But I think that the best work happens in solitude, reflective work, thoughtful work, and what better place to do that than in rural Florida, in Madison, Florida.
Well, you're speaking my language here. I really love that. Right now, I mentioned before, I have this Fearless Journeys community, and we have a book club, and right now we're actually in the midst of reading Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness is the Key. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that, but
I haven't. I'm gonna look it up right now.
You will. You're living it. You're living it already. So, but I think it'll really confirm a lot of the things you're talking about in terms of getting away from distraction. Trying to find steadiness in a sense in a world that's constantly spinning. So I think it's something anyway. It's kind of interesting timing that I'm having you go on here, because I think some of the things you just talked about, Ryan Holiday uses a lot of examples of people in history, which is cool because he's got he has a series focused on the Stoic philosophy, right? So he's got the book "The Obstacle is the Way," and he often talks about all these people like Marcus Aurelius and Epicurus and Seneca and all these people. But then he takes them and gives like modern day examples, so he gives you examples of Winston Churchill and John F. Kennedy and Anne Frank and like all these people, and like how stillness was part of their life, and how they stayed focused, but yet how they had things they did outside of their work as well, not necessarily always 100% working all the time. But anyway, so that's really interesting. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about something you do that it sounds like it's a real passion of your heart. It's something that you mentioned you started at least in high school, maybe earlier, with debate, and you started your own debate nonprofit called Incubate Debate. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of why you started this, and how you got there, and what some of the activities that are going on with Incubate Debate.
Absolutely. Incubate Debate is America's fastest growing high school debate league. 5,000 kids. We went from 1,500 to 5,000 in just the past year. I wrote this essay for the Free Press for Barry Weiss last summer about how traditional mainstream high school debate have become totally ideologically one-sided. And so I give examples of judges who are on the record saying in their online judge profiles that students read before the debate, Francisco, that if you argue that capitalism can solve poverty or that Israel has a right to defend itself, you will lose no matter what. The idea that a student, a young girl 14 years old from Miami Gardens or from Baltimore, would lose a debate because the judge disagreed with her opinion, because it clashed with her own political or ideological opinion, that is wrong, and it's antithetical to everything the debate stands for. Debate is about an open marketplace of ideas. Really simply put, the best argument wins no matter what. I'm unapologetically pro-life, but when I'm judging a debate on codifying Roe v. Wade, I check my pro-life views at the door, and I look, hey, you got a team over here, you got a team over here. Who made the better argument, Francisco? And so I look at that and I say, high school debate, mainstream high school debate has lost its way. I coached debate for 2 years actually in Miami Gardens, and I saw this up and close. And I said, I'm going to give up on this system, but I'm not going to give up on high school debate as an activity. And so what better way than I think to build an alternative as opposed to just complaining? And I think a lot of people these days, they complain and they want to reform, but it doesn't work. And so how do we actually build an alternative? That's what Incubate Debate's been about. And we've done that where we're now hosting 25 in-person debate tournaments, not just for kids in Florida, but South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, California, and New York, where middle and high school students from all walks of life, all political persuasions, come together in person 3 times a year to debate timely and timeless issues, whether questions on whether there is a climate emergency, to whether college DEI programs should be abolished, to whether there should be an assault weapons ban reenacted, to whether the U.S. should continue the use of armed military drones. It's an opportunity for young Americans from everywhere to participate in a free debate program first and foremost, but also one that is focused on merit and excellence. The people who judge our tournaments are not ideological people. They're from the community. They're business owners and operators, local elected politicians from both sides of the aisle. They're veterans, they're active service members, they're first responders. And they take an oath, actually, that they are going to be impartial to the round, and they're only going to judge based on merit. We need more merit in this country. Merit made America great, and it will make America great again. And so that's what Incubate Debate has been about, and I couldn't be prouder of what we're doing. Our mission is to bring the power and practice of debate to young Americans. It benefited me. I can't imagine my life without it. I think more and more young people, whether they want to join the debate team or participate in our events that we host at individual schools, this is an activity that is going to change lives, and Incubate Debate is going to be front and center in that movement.
That's fantastic. So you basically were part of a different debate community that then later, in more recent years, after your involvement, basically started taking issues off the table, basically saying some of these things were settled topics, right? Settled issues. Right. You can't debate, right? You can't debate these things. Kind of like maybe some people in the climate change arena, right? No matter what you think about climate change, there's definitely an ideology there where you can't even walk into a lot of places and have a debate. They say, oh, it's settled science, right? Like COVID, right? It's settled science. And so So what you're so this is what you saw and this is what you encountered. Was it? I mean, you were now in college or beyond when you started recognizing this. Were other young people that were part of the program bringing this to your attention? How did you learn about some of the problems going on in those debate societies that you used to be a part of?
Yeah. I left high school, Francisco, 2013. I graduated, went off to college, and I came back as a volunteer debate judge at a Title I high school because I wanted to give back somewhat, in a little way, to this activity that had given me so much. So I had a team, just happened to be all black. It was largely a black school in Miami Gardens, you know the area by the stadium there in North Miami. And we went to our first debate tournament. And I'll never forget what happened to one of my students. Again, a young black man. He had criticized the Black Lives Matter organization for being anti-family, for being Marxist. And the judge told him, you know what? You would have won the debate had you not criticized BLM. BLM is doing good work for people like you. Think about that. A judge telling a black student, you would have won. Your arguments were good. Your evidence was good. But had you not criticized my political affiliate, you would have won the debate. And, you know, in the moment, I think I look back at that and say, okay, wow, that kind of makes sense. That was the beginning of an arc of things that I saw, but I didn't really, I thought this was more of a one-off thing. And then over the course of the next year and a half, it just more and more examples of it. This wasn't happening to one of my students, but someone I knew well had given a mildly conservative argument about federalism, that states should have control over how they dictate education. And the judge said, better luck next time, Trumpy, and gave him the loss. Didn't address the arguments, didn't say, hey, you should do more research on this or do more evidence on that. He said the only feedback on his judge ballot was better luck next time, Trumpy. This is an adult speaking to a student. What kind of role model? And by the way, I'm all for being tough on kids if their logic is lacking, if their evidence and reasoning is lacking. But to target a student, to punish them when you've got scholarships on the line, college acceptances on the line, not to mention their sense of self-esteem on the line, to tell them, yeah, you know what, you spent 3 months preparing for this debate, but because I'm not a conservative and I don't like Donald Trump, I'm going to give you the loss and punish you for my own personal politics.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. So, and it's even more unfortunate that it's going on in a place where the judge seemingly had committed themselves to a program centered around the idea of debating, right? Debating issues, right? Not so it seems like even somebody who was so involved in the concept and maybe champion the idea of debate would be basically silencing debate. So that's even more unfortunate. But your you basically then said, okay, we're going to start something new. How exactly can you compete against? Because there's a lot of these organizations that have been around a long time. They got lots of different institutional frameworks built into the system. Maybe they've got relationship with schools and lots of alumni like yourself. And now you said you have over 5,000 students. You're the fastest growing debate program in the country, Incubate Debate. How did you get that started, and how did you grow successfully?
Gradually and then suddenly, as Hemingway once wrote. It was a small program. We started off at the University of Miami with a free summer camp the summer of 2019 with 16 kids. We call them the Sweet 16. That program grew when COVID hit. We launched tournaments online because everyone from Harvard and Yale to all the big mainstream tournaments that had been captured by woke ideology also went online. So we actually had an opportunity to compete. We didn't need to rent a ballroom and hire food and catering and all of that. We needed a Zoom account for $60 a month. And so all of a sudden we were on the same platform as Harvard and Yale tournaments. And we did that, and we presented for the first time, Francisco. We gave kids an alternative. They wrote to us and said, thank you. Thank you for letting me compete in a debate where I'm not going to be told that I lost even before I uttered a word, because I was advocating for Israel's self-determination, because I was advocating for capitalism as a tool for lifting folks out of poverty. And so students and coaches voted with their feet. They said, look, we are now have an alternative, much like the CLT, the classic learning test, has given folks an alternative as opposed to the SAT and other college board exams, just like the University of Austin is giving folks an alternative to the corruption in higher education that we're seeing in places like Harvard. Incubate Debate gave high school and middle school debaters an alternative, and they've taken it. And what I'm most proud of is that we've also welcomed kids who were not in debate, who would otherwise not have done debate, were it not for Incubate. Madison County, you know it, is a very rural county. There's not been a debate team there in over 70 years, Francisco. We just stood up a lead with North Florida College right there in Madison County, where students from Hamilton to those nearby, whether it's Hamilton, Suwannee, Madison, Leon, Wakulla, Taylor, now have an opportunity. They would have otherwise had to go as far east as Jacksonville or as far west as Pensacola, multiple hours away. They can now have rigorous local competition because of Incubate. And so it's a two-part strategy. One, it's welcoming the disaffected students who are sick and tired of being told you lost because you didn't align with my politics. And then it's also the next generation of students who want to do debate but didn't have a platform to do it up until now. And so Incubate is bringing those groups together. And by the way, what better way to achieve real viewpoint diversity than to have students, whether they're the son and daughter of a farmer or the sons and daughters of doctors and lawyers, come together as Americans, put their politics aside, and debate the issues of the day in a respectful and engaging way.
So you really got your success during the pandemic. It sounds during COVID when you had that level platform in a sense, and probably didn't have to charge exorbitant fees like Harvard and Yale and Stanford and all these places that maybe have the institutional brand, but also they're not just maybe charging fees, but they're higher fees for those types of things, but they're they're not allowing that viewpoint diversity that some of these young people really crave. Let me ask you though, you do a lot of things in person now, right? As well, do you do a mix, like a hybrid?
Everything's actually in person now, and so all
That's
of our
great.
events are in person. There's
That's
nothing
great.
like there's nothing like being there in person. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I know you mentioned you have over 25 events each year. Is there some kind of tournament style thing? Is there some kind of like championship, like big thing that people go to at the end, like some kind of competition?
There is. The Incubate National Championship was in Jacksonville in April. It was unbelievable. To take the 5,000 kids, winnow that down to 100, and imagine them for 2 back-to-back days debating questions like, is Donald Trump guilty in the federal January 6th case? Or should Taiwan be defended by the U.S. in the event of a Chinese invasion? And so what we were proud to do is to bring those kids together, but also to have people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Bill de Blasio come out and coach those students on top of the excellent coaching they're getting from their teachers back at school to prepare them for this next level intense competition. And so I encourage folks, we did a great partnership with Open to Debate to actually broadcast our debate on over 300 public radio stations all across the country. So hundreds of thousands of people tuned in to that final round debate, which is about the climate emergency and DEI programs on college campuses. And we got great feedback. And to go to YouTube and just type in Open to Debate, Incubate Debate to watch that national championship, it really is something special. And it's the culmination of a year's hard work for these students to get to that point and to compete for scholarship dollars to then either go off to college or to use that to enter the workforce or to start their own business.
That's fantastic. And I imagine, what do you actually have viewpoint diversity among the students? I mean, how is it? Is it just more conservative students that have gravitated towards this, or what kind of people are you attracting to the program?
It's the mix. It is unbelievable. And you would think, right, that an organization that is built on free speech would attract conservatives at this point in time. But let's not forget that it was progressives not too long ago, classic liberals like Glenn Greenwald, who were advocating for free speech in the wake of the Iraq War, when you couldn't have a dissenting opinion without getting blackballed in the DC Beltway. And free speech is apolitical. It brings in everybody under the sun. Our idea is really simple. We are nonpartisan. We do not take a view on any issue. Our job is to merely be a platform for young Americans, whether they're progressive leaning or conservative leaning, or don't even lean one way or the other, to come out and recognize and debate what are the best arguments, not through slogans, not through watching a political ad, but what are the best arguments that win the day through the rigorous competition of ideas. Your evidence versus mine, your argument versus hers. If that happens on a large enough scale, students think for themselves, and that's all we want. If that's progressive or conservative or somewhere in the middle, that's what it is. And we're just proud and fortunate to be that platform for young Americans to hash out those differences and to debate the issues of the day.
That's great. So if somebody wants to get involved with you, maybe they are a student or a parent and they want to get their young person involved right now, or maybe they are just somebody beyond, high school age that wants to do what you do, maybe help coach people, maybe they're a business leader or a teacher or whatever, and they want to help. How can they learn more about Incubate Debate?
They would just go to incubatedebate.org. They can fill out one of our volunteer sheets, or if they have a son or daughter or a granddaughter or a niece or nephew who they might think would be a great fit, either middle school or high school, sign them up for our workshops. Again, these happen all across Florida, South Carolina, California, New York, and we are eager to welcome students who have a passion, maybe not for debate just yet, but have a passion for thinking about the issues shaping the country. And they might find that passion for debate as they're meeting other students who are talking about their own perspectives on these issues.
And I imagine you could also use some support, right? Probably financial support if people wanted to do that. They could probably find you there. I also, I think you guys are doing some kind of clothing donation drive, maybe for some suit wear for some of the students, I think. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we'd be honored to have anyone support at any size by going to incubatedebate.org, whether that is a donation one time or recurring. But also, as you said, our students like to dress to impress. They like to be dressed to the nines. And so if you've got a suit or a dress shirt or a tie that you might not have worn for a while and you want to donate it, you can do that at incubatedebate.org. Our PO box is there, and we'll pass that along to students, men and women who would be proud to wear that, and it would boost their confidence beyond measure to walk into that tournament dressed in Sunday's best.
Well, James, you're doing so much between running Azoria and also you founded Incubate Debate, and you're involved with that. It sounds like you devote a lot of time to that. So you're a busy guy, but maybe you're focused from Madison County. But I think you're still under 30, though, right?
I am. I'm 29. Lord willing, I'll be 30 in January.
That's amazing. So you've done a lot in your first 29 years here. And I think, there's very probably few people your age who have been able to accomplish so much in these fields, also without a college degree as well. So I think that's pretty interesting. Let's talk just a few more minutes here. And I just want to ask your take on a few things that are, you're involved in really studying a lot of macroeconomics and, studying the economy from a lot of different ways, both for your probably your own personal investments, but also for clients. So first of all, we've experienced a lot of, especially since you were born, right? Since in the last 20 years or so, we've had everything from the internet bubble in the late 90s. We had 9/11. We had the 2008 economic crisis after the real estate bubble crashed. Then you fast forward and we've got you got the government intervention in the healthcare system. You then fast forward even more and you have COVID, and then post COVID you had this crazy amount of inflation that's not just here in America, but it's all around the world. That's been affected by a lot of things, from the supply chain to the printing of money and so on and so on. But the bottom line is there's been a lot of economic up and down, and especially for the young people your age and even younger coming up now through your debate programs and things like that. How have you been able to, from your standpoint in the financial world, been able to kind of manage all of the ups and downs of these economic cycles we've been experiencing, and we've been experiencing them pretty fast?
We have been. There's been obviously a lot of real world volatility in the economy. And then there's been real world volatility in the marketplace around said economy. And it seems like every 2 to 3 months, Francisco, there's a new narrative. There's a new theory about how the world works, right? We started the year off and there was this idea that there was going to be 7 rate cuts this year. And then just like that, the idea was there was going to be maybe a rate hike this year. And now we're of the idea there's going to be 3 rate cuts this year. And so I'll tell you, the economy is volatile. Think about the period going into COVID, the period during COVID, and the period coming out of it, where inflation went from maybe being 0 to 1% right in the aftermath of COVID, to then skyrocketing to 5% in June of 21, getting as high as 8% in the summer of 22. The real world economy is volatile, no question about it. But it's August. In the 8 months since January, how much has the real economy actually moved relative to how much the markets have moved? The markets just move on a whim. There's a new story, a new narrative, a new risk, a new something or other that catches folks' attention, and they overreact to the upside. And as we saw earlier this month, they sure overreact to the downside, with the VIX going from at one point 2 weeks earlier at 12 up to 65 and then back down under 20 a week later. And so what I would say is keep calm, carry on, stay invested. Don't overreact too much to the good news, and don't overreact too much and panic too much to the bad news. If you would have judged the market on Monday morning by what it was going to do over the next 2 weeks, you'd be really surprised that the VIX, again, went as high as 65 and then back down a week later below 20. The narrative, the volatility, the noise is one thing, but the real economy is what matters. And that thing's moving around a lot, whether it's a retail sales print or a jobs report or inflation or whatever. That's moving around a lot, but it's moving around a lot less than markets would have you think. And markets are ultimately a pendulum. They're going to swing from euphoria and greed on one hand, and then they're going to overcorrect to panic and fear on the other. The truth is in the middle. And the truth is that for the last 30 years, the S&P 500 has been compounding at 10% a year. And what we want to do is, we don't necessarily want folks to take all their money that's invested in the S&P and bonds and invest with us. We think there's a role for Azoria in a portfolio. Perhaps that's 10, 15, up to 20% to give people a differentiated, uncorrelated return stream. But at the end of the day, investing in the American economy through the 500 largest companies that continue to punch above their weight, that continue to innovate, that continue to work side by side with the American worker to really create something special that's only available in this country, there's no better investment than that. And so if there's one thing that I'm going to be at Azoria, it is I'm going to be brutally honest with people. And I'm going to say that your best investment is still to be long America, and that is to be long the S&P 500. And your second best investment is to think for yourself. And if you think for yourself and you want to look at Azoria's products, go to azoriapartners.com. We'll be launching a range of ETFs in 2025. Take a look at what we're doing. And if it makes sense, then it makes sense. And if it doesn't for you at the time, then that's okay. But we simply want to be an alternative for folks who want to have access to investments, for example, like Argentina, that they might not otherwise have access to, but they have really strong views. I know a lot of Argentinians and a lot of South Americans, they look at someone like Milei and they say, this guy is really going to supercharge the Argentinian economy, and I want to be a part of it. I want to invest alongside Javier Milei as he is making Argentina great again. And that's separate and apart from my investments in the S&P 500 or maybe earning 4 to 5% on T-bills. I want to be a part of the Argentinian reform story. And hopefully I'll be able to come back soon and share what Azoria is doing on that front.
Well, you don't have to sell me on any more Argentina, or I might move there soon, James. Well, anyway, I a couple last questions here. One, so you talked about keep calm, right, and carry on. Yeah. But we also see what's coming, and a lot of people are really concerned. Now, a lot of people are really excited about it too. So let me talk about we have this great innovation happening right now with AI, right, artificial intelligence. It's but what role will that play in the labor market? What should Americans be fearing for their jobs? And what do investors like you? How do you approach the world of AI that's coming faster and faster every day?
Yeah, I would. It really depends what space you're in. So think of blue collar versus white collar. If you use your hands for a living, AI is not coming for your job anytime soon. If you research for a living, if you write for a living, if you do marketing for a living or video editing for a living, you have every reason to not be complacent. I don't think fearful. You've got to get to the point where you are in the top 10% of your field. What skills can you do? How can you be proactive? You know, one thing, Francisco, that AI is really good at is if I give it a task, it can execute that task far quicker. If I can say, hey, write a short investment memo on what Javier Milei has already done as president of Argentina and list some important stats, AI can literally do that in 30 seconds. I cannot do that in 30 seconds. But the difference between me and AI is that I can be proactive. I can proactively offer that to clients, to investors, whereas AI still needs to be told, do this task and report back. And so in very simple terms, you know, talk about boosting your skill set, boosting EQ over IQ. That's harder to do than the advice I'm going to share now, which is in an AI world where AI, you have to ask it to do something before it does it. What can you be doing proactively for your stakeholders, for your shareholders, that AI could do but wouldn't otherwise do unless asked? And I think that's at the core of it. This technology is a game changer. It is going to change everything about the way the world works, but it's going to profoundly upend white-collar work long before it profoundly upends blue-collar work. And so that's what I would say about AI. And there's going to be a lot of exciting investments to make. You talk about, the NVIDIAs of the world, but also what about the companies that we've yet to even talk about publicly that are going to use this technology to boost top-line revenue, to save on labor costs by, you can sugarcoat it any way you want, by firing people who are otherwise not productive and empowering technology to do their work that's being overseen by the very productive few at the top. Let's not forget what a man by the name of Elon Musk did with Twitter. He fired 3 out of 4 employees shortly after taking over, and the site has never seen more web traffic than it sees today. Even the Democratic president, who is not a fan of Elon Musk, took his resignation from the race to Twitter before he did anywhere else. And so there are companies out there, Francisco, who are very capable of firing 3 out of 4 people. And AI is going to make up for the slack, and they'll be more profitable than ever. And we are going to find those companies as Azoria and give investors an opportunity to invest alongside us as we capitalize on this enormous, enormous paradigm shift with generative artificial intelligence.
So interesting, because you said at the top there, obviously, so people who work with their hands, right? I'm a big fan of Mike Rowe, right? So a lot of people know of him as the guy that does the Dirty Job show, right? And so he's always constantly going out there with those blue collar workers, whether it's the people fixing your telephone pole lines, right? Whether it's people mowing your grass, whether it's people painting your house. You can think of everything, but today it's also working with your hands in a lot more higher tech type of things as well. But there's just so many jobs out there that people are not able to do because we've been kind of pushed people to college and do all these other things, and maybe forgot about the trades, and now actually plumbers are not only in demand, they make a lot of money, right? And so it might not be the most glamorous thing that you think about doing. Maybe even as a parent, you wish your son or daughter might be a doctor or a lawyer or something, right? Hey, my son's a plumber, right? But the son who's the plumber has got those skills, probably making a lot more money and definitely has a lot of demand. So you're saying those types of things. AI doesn't want to clean our toilets, right? But and put up the telephone poles. But maybe those types of jobs are not as threatened as maybe some of the things that can be done and automated by computers, such as maybe some of the things I do, like write. So somebody like me, what your advice is, hey, just be better at what you do and don't be complacent, and make sure you use the AI to make yourself better and more effective and more valuable in the marketplace.
That's exactly right.
I recently wrote a book, James, called The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. It was based on a lot of the conversations I've had with people on this podcast. And I came up with 10 common characteristics of the entrepreneur that I really see a lot of the people that have been on the podcast share. But one of the things, one of the reasons I named the book the way I did, first of all, I went back and I listened to the first 100 episodes of this podcast. I was like, wow, this term, the American dream, has actually come up a lot not even by me, but by my guest. So that was kind of in the back of my mind. But also, there's been a lot of what I talked about before in the previous questions about the turmoil and the volatility of the economy, and a lot of the angst about AI, or just, we've had angst for a while about maybe jobs going overseas, or your immigrants are taking your jobs, or all these sorts of issues. There's always been a lot of angst, but maybe more so now than ever. But I think there's a common conversation happening right now in this country. Some of it's around the economy, some of it's around some of the politically charged rhetoric and what's going on, in government and things like that as well. But I think a lot of people are not sure. You're seeing serious conversations about, is the American dream still possible for this generation and for future generations? So I just wanted to ask you a question, maybe to pivot. You're technically Gen Z, is that right? You're right on the edge there.
I'm right on the edge, millennial, Gen Z, yeah.
Yeah, but everybody that you're working with below you in those, not in the debate, they're all Gen Z people. I see a lot of Gen Z people. So between Gen Z and millennials, what do you think though, coming up here, about the American dream? Is it still possible? And if so, how?
It is. It absolutely is possible. It's harder than ever. It's with inflation, with the cost of homeownership out of reach, it's harder than ever, but it's still possible. I think one of the great things about the country is that the policies in Florida are very different than the policies in California. And so the American dream is more possible in states like Florida than it is in states like California, depending on what it is you want to do. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that. You think about the power of Silicon Valley, and you think about the resources available there. But what the American dream really means to me is meritocracy in its purest form. That no matter your background, no matter where you came from, whether you were born here or you're a legal immigrant, that if you do the right things, you have the next great idea, and you work tirelessly toward it, that you have a real shot at making it big. And when we say making it big, we don't necessarily mean the cover of Forbes and billionaire status. We simply mean having an impact on real people and doing something magical. And so, difficult, yes. This is not the American dream of the 1970s, but it's absolutely still there. And I don't think that my story, for whatever it's worth, whatever semblance of success that I think I've had, would have been possible in any other country but this one. To be able to share ideas with someone, get support behind them, corral investors, and to have people take me seriously. It's about merit. I mean, there was the fact that I was the son of working class people, parents, the fact that I was young, that I was a college dropout. Those things would have been deal killers in any other country. And I was fortunate that the American dream isn't just what the government does, but it's also what the people think. And I think the people of this country at the core, Democrat, Republican, whatever, are still very much meritocratic. They want to back the idea and are less concerned with who the messenger is, as long as that person is trustworthy. They don't have to be credentialed. They might even be someone who spent time in prison, but there's someone who they believe has an idea, that idea is going to work, and they want to get behind it. And that's what the American dream means to me.
That's an excellent answer. I have heard maybe some young people maybe push back a little bit on, maybe because maybe it's harder, is what you're saying. But this idea of meritocracy is, I think, has always been at the center of the American dream. However, I've heard a few different viewpoints that say, that we don't have the meritocracy that we used to have. Some people might say because of DEI programs, right? Maybe some people are being pushed to the front of the line, or given some subsidies or some opportunities that maybe other people are not, based on their race, their gender, whatever. Then you have others that might say, well, it's not really meritocracy because, like, I have friends or people in my age group that they come from wealthy backgrounds, and so they just get the leg up because mommy or daddy paid their college education. Meanwhile, I have to go and get student loans. I don't have an easy job opportunity right out of college like they do. They can go work for their parents' firm or their parents' business or take it over or something like that. You're seeing a big generational wealth transfer right now happening there as well. So is the meritocracy that's been at the center of the American dream, is that under threat right now, or is there still enough of it that's alive?
It's absolutely under threat, hence why it's hard and perhaps more out of reach than it's been in a generation. But the DEIs of the world, those only really apply for the most part. There's always exceptions. You saw recently Harley Davidson got caught up for pushing a DEI workforce training, and same thing with the tractor supply. But for the most part, if you're a business owner, affirmative action doesn't take place in the real world of free markets. It takes place in the world of college education, which maybe isn't even education all that much these days. But DEI and this affirmative action, this pushing certain races and sexes to the front of the line just because, is less and less relevant in the entrepreneurial realm, although more and more relevant in the academic realm. And so there's no question that it's tough. It used to be that if you get good grades and had a good SAT score, you would get into Harvard. Now the discrepancy between an Asian American getting into Harvard's SAT score and an African American couldn't be wider. And obviously the Supreme Court struck this down with the affirmative action case in the last term. That's a good thing, but still you have to create a culture of meritocracy that doesn't say that because of your skin color, because of your race, because of your creed, that you will get in or get pushed out. It's all about what your ideas are and what you bring to the table meritocratically.
Well, that's great. Well, James, this has been a really fantastic conversation, and you give us a lot of hope. I mean, I think if anyone's looking for the next generation, you have accomplished so much so far in the first 29 years of your life and everything you're doing. I'm going to, for those who maybe didn't catch some of the websites and things like that, we'll have all that available in the show notes as well, so people can check that out. And again, for those listening, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and give us some comments on what you thought about this conversation. But James, just want to give you some last words here if you have anything else to say to us today.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity and the great work that you're doing, Francisco, with Fearless Journey, and look forward to coming back to more and more events at the Economic Club of Miami. And Florida has seen a resurgence, Miami in particular, in the post-COVID world. And the work that you're doing to shine a light on the economic opportunity that South Florida has to offer is really admirable. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, James. Thanks for all you're doing. And thanks for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast. And thanks for being an agent of innovation yourself. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.